You've been lied to about self-worth. They told you it comes from being perfect, from fixing every flaw, from always getting it right. But if that were true, why do you still feel like you're not enough? Why do your thoughts race at night, repeating the same old doubts, the same old shame? Why does it hurt to be alone with your own mind? The truth is, self-judgment doesn't come from being broken. It comes from believing you shouldn't be. And that belief? It's the real prison. But there's a way out, not by becoming better, not by healing faster, but by letting go of the voice that says you have to be anything more than you already are. Tonight, as you fall asleep, you'll learn a powerful truth the ancient teachers once knew. When you stop clinging to the idea of who you think you should be, you finally meet the peace of who you are. Calm, whole, already enough. This isn't just another bedtime audio. This is the end of the fight inside. This is the night you stop judging and start resting. This is what your soul has been waiting for. Are you ready to be free? Let's begin. You've tried silencing it. You've tried ignoring it. You've even tried fighting it with force. But it keeps returning. The voice inside that picks you apart piece by piece. It's quiet when you're busy, loud when you're still. You lie in bed, and there it is again, pointing fingers, making you feel less than, measuring your worth against a scale you never agreed to. There is a reason it keeps speaking, and there is a reason you keep listening. What if the voice you call cruel was once trying to protect you? What if judgment didn't begin as punishment, but as a way to survive? What if you could see it clearly now, not as your identity, not as your truth, but as a mental habit rooted in fear, clinging, and misunderstanding? The teachings of the Buddha remind us suffering begins in the mind, and so does liberation. What we hold tightly, what we identify with, what we mistake as self, these illusions are the causes of our restlessness. The inner critic is not your enemy. It is simply the mind, confused and trying to find safety in a world it doesn't yet understand. In early life, praise and rejection shaped how you saw yourself. Approval meant safety. Disapproval felt like exile. Long before you knew the word for shame, you felt its sting. This conditioning didn't begin with logic. It began with sensation. Tension in the chest, heat in the face, tightness in the gut. These were the first signals that something was wrong, and the mind, being alert and eager to protect, recorded those moments like a cautious scribe. Each failure, each frown, each moment of being scolded or laughed at became a memory. But more than that, it became a map. A map of what to avoid, what to fix, what to hide. Over time, this map became your guide. It whispered, "Don't speak too loudly, they won't like it. Don't try that, you'll embarrass yourself. Don't rest, you haven't earned it." These thoughts were not born from malice. They were shaped by the fear of not belonging. And in Buddhist teaching, fear is one of the deepest forms of clinging. We cling to control, to safety, to certainty, even if that means clinging to the harsh voice in our heads. Because that voice feels familiar. It gives us rules. It pretends to protect us, but it never brings peace. The inner critic is a product of dukkha, the unease, the stress, the suffering that arises from grasping. It measures everything. It categorizes everything. It separates the self into good and bad, worthy and unworthy, spiritual and broken. But this is illusion. The self, as taught by the Buddha, is not fixed. It is empty of inherent nature. What we call I is simply conditions coming together. Thoughts, sensations, memories, habits, all arising and passing away. So when the inner critic says, "You are not enough," it is clinging to a false identity, a bundle of memories mistaken for a permanent self. The more we believe it, the more we suffer. Not because the voice is true, but because we grasp at it. We take it personally. We defend against it or collapse under it. And yet, none of that is necessary. The practice begins not in changing the voice, but in seeing it, noticing its tone, its timing, its texture. When does it arise? What does it fear? What does it try to control? In mindfulness, we do not resist the voice. We allow it to be seen. With awareness, it loses power. Not because we suppress it, but because we stop feeding it. Thoughts need energy. They need belief to stay alive. But awareness is like space. It does not cling. It does not judge. It simply allows. And in that allowing, something shifts. We begin to notice the pattern. The voice arises most when we feel exposed, uncertain, vulnerable. It tries to fix discomfort by pointing out flaws, but discomfort does not need fixing. It needs compassion. Compassion is not pity. It is the direct recognition that suffering is present and the willingness to meet it with tenderness. The Buddha taught that when we meet suffering with aversion, we double it. But when we meet it with mindfulness, we create the conditions for peace. When you hear the inner critic say, "You failed again," you can pause and say, suffering is here." Just that. A gentle acknowledgement. No drama, no resistance. This is wise seeing. The kind that pierces through illusion. The kind that recognizes thoughts as just thoughts. Sound, energy, passing clouds in a vast sky. And that vast sky? That's your true nature. Spacious, unbound, not defined by any one thought or feeling. As we deepen into this practice, something profound happens. We no longer rush to fix ourselves. We stop believing that worth comes from perfection. We begin to rest in equanimity, the calm balance that arises when we no longer cling to praise or shrink from blame. This balance is not cold. It's not indifference. It's a warm, grounded clarity. A stillness that sees all things as they are, without needing them to be different. In this space, the voice of the inner critic softens. It may still arise, but it no longer hooks you. You may hear it say, "You should have done more today," and you simply breathe. Smile. You don't argue. You don't collapse. You just see it, and it passes. And slowly, a new habit is formed. One based not on fear, but on presence. Presence reveals that you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not less than anyone. These ideas are rooted in comparison, and comparison is just another form of clinging. It clings to status, to image, to identity. But all of these are impermanent. They arise, they fade. Nothing you hold on to lasts. This truth is not meant to frighten you. It's meant to free you. Because if nothing lasts, then no label can define you. Not your failures, not your doubts, not the voice that says you're unworthy. All of it is wind. All of it can pass. What remains is your awareness, your presence, your capacity to love, even when the mind is noisy. The teachings point us toward non-identification. This is not about denying experience, but about not mistaking experience for identity. The critic says, "You are lazy," but mindfulness says, "A thought about laziness is arising." The critic says, "You're a failure," but mindfulness says, "Judgment is here." The shift is subtle but powerful. One keeps you trapped, the other sets you free. This freedom doesn't require perfection. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to return again and again to the present moment, because the present is the only place the critic can be met and understood. In the past, it was formed. In the future, it speculates. But only now can it be seen clearly. And when it is seen clearly, it begins to unravel, because clarity dissolves confusion, just as light dissolves shadow. The Buddha did not teach self-esteem. He taught no self, not as a negation, but as a liberation. The recognition that we are not the fixed stories we tell about ourselves, not the roles we play, not the thoughts we think. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it spacious, open, kind. In that space, you begin to choose differently, not from fear, but from love. You may still strive, but no longer to prove your worth. You may still grow, but not because you believe you're inadequate. You grow because it's your nature to unfold, like a flower naturally reaching toward the light, not to impress anyone, but because it's what it was made to do. And when you stumble, as you will, the voice may return. But now you meet it not with fear, not with shame, but with a gentle bow. "Ah, here you are again. I see you, and I will not abandon myself this time." This is the real transformation, not erasing the critic, but creating space around it. A soft field of awareness that holds everything without needing to control it. You are no longer at war with your mind. You are no longer trying to escape what's uncomfortable. You are present. You are still. And in that stillness, you hear something deeper. Not the critic, not even the praise, but the quiet truth beneath it all. You are already free. And tonight, you rest in that freedom. You let go of the voice that says you're not enough. You breathe in kindness. You breathe out tension. And you allow everything to be as it is, because nothing needs to be fixed, only understood, only held, only loved. This is the end of judgment. This is the beginning of peace. And so the voice softened, no longer sharp, no longer heavy, just a passing breeze in the vast field of your awareness. In seeing the critic for what it is, just a survival habit rooted in fear, you stepped into stillness. The tension started to loosen, but still something lingers, a shape in the silence. Not harsh this time, but quiet, polite, often praised, still powerful. It doesn't scream, it whispers, "Be good, do better, don't disappoint." That pressure doesn't come from punishment, it comes from approval. Praise, when misunderstood, becomes its own prison. At first it felt warm, a smile, a kind word, the sense of being seen. When you did well, whether it was in school, at home, or among others, you were noticed, encouraged, rewarded. It felt like love. But soon, that reward became something else, something heavier, not just encouragement, but expectation, not just joy, but pressure. And before you could understand what was happening, your nervous system formed a connection. To be loved, you must be good, not just sometimes, always. This early pattern often hides in plain sight. It looks like discipline, it sounds like motivation, but underneath it is a fragile contract. Be perfect or lose connection. Be impressive or feel invisible. Be agreeable or feel unsafe. So you learned to shape yourself accordingly, to study harder, to say the right things, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. And every time you were praised for this, the conditioning deepened. The identity of the good one began to take root. In Buddhist teachings, clinging to identity is one of the deepest causes of suffering. When you believe you must be someone in order to be worthy, you are trapped by the illusion of self. A role, a story, a concept. And every moment becomes an attempt to maintain that image. Early praise often locks this image in place. It creates an internal scorekeeper, not one that scolds, but one that monitors. Every move, every tone of voice, every facial expression. This inner judge isn't loud, but it is relentless. It wants to get everything right. It fears being misunderstood. It scans for how others are reacting, not because it's self-obsessed, but because it was trained to survive by pleasing. As a child, being good became the path to safety. So any deviation felt dangerous. Making a mistake wasn't just a mistake, it was a threat to belonging. Disagreeing wasn't just about opinion, it risked love. And over time, this shaped the entire structure of your mind. You may have become the one who helped everyone, but couldn't ask for help. The one who smiled through pain, the one who held back tears in case they were too much. In the Dharma, this is called suffering from attachment to form, mistaking the temporary for the true, a smile that hides sadness, an achievement that masks emptiness. The outer appearance is praised, but the inner experience is ignored, and so the self becomes split, a public face and a hidden ache. Even now you may notice it. The subtle panic when you fall short, the guilt when you rest, the tension when someone is disappointed. These reactions are not faults. They are echoes of early praise that taught you to base your value on performance. Conditional love creates a conditional self. When the message is, you are loved because you're good, then you must keep being good to feel safe. But good is rarely defined clearly. It changes depending on mood, culture, moment. So you stay alert. You scan, you adjust, you contort. You become skilled in reading the room, but forget how to read yourself. This is not a moral failure. It's trauma. The trauma of not knowing if your worth will remain when you are simply you. This creates chronic self-judgment. Not because you think you're bad, but because you fear not being good enough. There is always a higher standard, a new goal, a way to be more helpful, more spiritual, more kind. Even growth becomes a way to prove your worth. Even healing becomes performance. In Buddhist practice, this is the subtle trap of attachment to virtue, wanting to be seen as right or pure or awake. But any identity, no matter how noble, is still clinging. The awakened heart is not concerned with being perceived a certain way. It is only concerned with freedom. Freedom means letting go of the image. Freedom means resting in the truth that who you are without trying is already whole. But this takes deep undoing. The good kid identity is not easy to release. It feels safe, familiar, but it costs too much. It costs your spontaneity, your honesty, your softness. It costs your ability to say no, your ability to say, I don't know. It costs your ability to be human without shame. One of the most powerful tools for dissolving this identity is honest self-reflection without seeking improvement. Sitting quietly with yourself, not to find what's wrong, not to fix, but simply to witness, to hear your own thoughts and stay, to feel sadness arise and not justify it, to allow anger without guilt. This is not indulgence. It is truth-telling, the kind of truth that leads to peace. The teachings remind us that peace is not found in being good. Peace is found in being free from the need to be good. And paradoxically, this freedom opens the heart in ways that perfection never can. Because when love is no longer something to earn, it becomes something to give, first to yourself, then to others. To begin this shift, it helps to notice when praise begins to control you. Do you feel lighter or more anxious when someone compliments you? Do you feel relaxed or pressured when you're told you did well? Is your joy rooted in the moment or in how you're being perceived? This inquiry is gentle, no shame, just observation. Because observation brings awareness, and awareness brings choice. When you see the pattern clearly, you are no longer in its grip. You can thank the voice that wants to protect you, but you do not have to obey it. You can notice the part of you that wants to be seen as good, and still choose honesty over approval. It also helps to reflect on the origins. Who praised you most as a child? What did they praise? Was it your kindness? Your silence? Your achievements? Did they praise your being or only your doing? Did you feel safe being messy, confused, moody? Or did you learn to hide those parts? These reflections are not for blame, they are for insight. Because insight is what ends cycles. When you see where the chain began, you stop passing it on to yourself and to others. From a Buddhist lens, this is the breaking of samskara, habitual mental imprints formed by repeated thoughts and reactions. Every time you pause instead of seeking approval, you interrupt the samskara. You weaken the habit. You open a space, and in that space, something new is born. Unconditional friendliness toward yourself. This friendliness is not about liking everything, it's about not turning away. When you fall short, you stay. When you feel shame, you hold it. When you want to prove yourself, you breathe instead. You return again and again to presence. Not presence for performance, not presence to impress, just presence. Awareness that is not striving, awareness that sees, allows, includes. This is the ground of freedom, the space where the need to be perfect dissolves and only tenderness remains. As this practice deepens, life begins to shift. You may find that your sense of identity softens, that you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, that you can rest even when things are undone. You begin to live more from sincerity than from strategy. This is the essence of non-doing, a state of being that arises not from laziness, but from wisdom. Knowing that striving is not the way to wholeness. Knowing that you are not a project, you are presence itself. In this presence, you begin to unhook from outcomes. You may still receive praise, but it no longer defines you. You may still disappoint someone, but it no longer destroys you. You may still work, achieve, help, but the doing flows from joy, not fear. This is how the good kid becomes the free adult. Not by rebelling, not by becoming careless, but by meeting every inner command with awareness and choosing love over fear every time. Eventually, the nervous system begins to trust this. It learns that rest does not mean rejection, that imperfection does not lead to isolation, that love, when true, does not depend on roles or results. This trust is felt in the body, in your breath, in your belly, in your eyes softening when you look in the mirror. You no longer see someone who must perform. You see someone who is here, present, real, enough. And in that seeing, the pattern loses its power. You are no longer held together by effort. You are held by truth. The truth that your worth has never been measured by your goodness. The truth that praise may have shaped your path, but it does not define your essence. The truth that who you are when you stop trying is finally, fully free. And in this freedom, you begin to live again. Not for the smile of others, not for the gold stars or kind words, but for the quiet joy of being. This is where the journey continues and the burden finally drops. And once you begin to untangle from the pressure of praise, another layer appears, older, heavier. It doesn't speak in your tone. It feels different, sharper, sometimes louder, sometimes colder. It tells you how you should act, what you should feel, who you should be. It shows up before you make a decision. It lingers after you speak. You hear it in your inner corrections, in your guilt for resting, in your fear of letting others down. This voice is not just yours. It is borrowed, learned, carried, passed down, and you may never have noticed. This is the voice of conditioning. In Buddhist practice, we are invited to look deeply into the causes and conditions that shape our perception. Nothing arises by accident. There is no self that is separate from the influences that built it. The way we speak to ourselves was modeled before it became internal, and many of those models came from the people who raised us: parents, caregivers, teachers, elders. Not always through words, but often through tone, posture, silence, reactions, approval, withdrawal. These were the early teachers, and they left marks. Sometimes those marks look like standards. Be useful, be quiet, be strong, don't complain, don't make a scene. Other times they show up in shame. You're too sensitive, you're selfish, you're always difficult. Over time, these messages took root, not because you believed them right away, but because they were repeated. Because they came from people you depended on. And dependence, especially in childhood, makes anything feel like truth. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from mistaken identity, and one of the deepest forms of mistaken identity is taking someone else's voice and making it your own. Not through choice, but through survival. When love feels conditional, the child adjusts. It absorbs the rules, adopts the patterns, creates masks. And later, when that child grows, The voice is still there, shaping thoughts, choices, relationships. This voice doesn't always sound cruel. Sometimes it sounds responsible, disciplined, realistic, but it doesn't feel free because it is rooted in fear. Fear of disapproval, fear of rejection, fear of being too much or not enough. These inherited voices form a mental script, one that plays quietly underneath everything you do. You may follow it without question, you may rebel against it, but still feel trapped by it. Either way, it controls the mind until it is seen clearly. Recognition is the first step. Begin to notice your tone when you make a mistake, when you are alone, when you fail to meet an internal rule. Listen. Is it your voice, or does it sound like someone else? Sometimes it comes in phrases, familiar ones. You should have known better. Why can't you just stop being dramatic? Even if the words aren't exact, the feeling is a tightening, a pressure, a need to justify yourself or fix yourself instantly. As soon as awareness lands, the pattern begins to shift, not through resistance, not through anger, but through presence. This is what mindfulness teaches us, to observe without adding more layers. When you feel the inner voice reacting, pause. Hold the reaction in gentle attention. Stay with the feeling beneath it. Often it is something young, fragile, confused, not wrong, just shaped by fear. You are not here to blame your parents or reject the past. That only strengthens the chain. You are here to see what was passed down so you don't keep passing it forward. This is the work of healing in the Dharma, to recognize the pain that came before and to end the cycle through wisdom and compassion. Compassion means acknowledging the humanity of those who came before you. Your caregivers were not blank slates. They were carrying their own voices, their own fear, their own conditions. If they judged harshly, it's likely because they were judged harshly. If they withheld love, it's likely because they didn't receive it freely either. This does not excuse harm, but it helps release you from the illusion that it was personal, that you were broken, that you caused it. These are false beliefs that deepen suffering, and the teachings call us to end suffering by ending delusion. Delusion tells you that you are the voice, that your pain is who you are, but awareness shows you that the voice is just a habit, a conditioned sound, empty of fixed meaning. It arises, it passes, like clouds in an open sky. To undo internalized voices, you must bring in a new one, not forced, not fake, but one that speaks with kindness, one that holds you without agenda. This is not positive thinking, this is right view. Seeing clearly that the self is not a fixed object but a process. You are not stuck, you are unfolding. Try speaking gently to the part of you that feels shame. Let it hear something new, something simple. You're allowed to be here. You're allowed to feel this. You don't have to perform anymore. Say it quietly. Say it often. Not to erase the old voice, but to offer an alternative. The more this happens, the more the nervous system learns that safety is possible without perfection, that love can exist without pressure. This is what it means to take refuge, not just in teachings or rituals, but in your own awakened heart, the part of you that watches without judgment, the part of you that has never been touched by fear. That part is always here, silent, still, waiting to be remembered. As you continue, you may start to see how these voices shaped more than just thoughts. They shaped your body, your breath, your posture, the way you enter a room, the way you say sorry before speaking, the way you minimize your needs. These are physical habits of fear, and they can be softened. When you feel the urge to shrink, pause. When you feel the pressure to please, breathe. Let your body learn a new rhythm, one that doesn't react to old rules, but responds to truth. You are not here to fulfill someone else's blueprint. You are here to awaken. In this awakening, forgiveness arises, not as a duty, but as a natural result of understanding. You stop carrying blame. You stop carrying the pain of ancestors. You stop trying to fix what isn't yours. And you begin the gentle process of becoming who you are, before the voices, before the roles, before the masks. That self is not a concept. It is a presence, a quiet, steady awareness that sees all things clearly and holds them all with love. This is the liberation the Buddha spoke of, not escape from life, but freedom within it. Freedom to meet each moment with clarity, without dragging the past into the present. Freedom to feel sadness without judgment, to say no without guilt, to rest without explaining. And over time, the voices fade, not because you forced them to disappear, but because you stopped feeding them, you stopped believing them, you stopped reacting to them. They may still echo, but they no longer define you. They are sounds in the distance. You bow to them, and you continue walking. Each step is a letting go. Each breath is a new beginning. And with every pause, the space between you and the old conditioning grows. That space is peace. That peace is your nature, and it cannot be taken away. And so the old voices began to lose their hold, not by force, not by erasing history, but by meeting each inherited pattern with awareness and compassion. There was space now, space between the thought and the truth, space between the reaction and the response. In that space, clarity grew. But clarity is not always what the mind expects. It doesn't always come with lightness. Sometimes, when the noise quiets down, what remains are the feelings you once tried to rise above. The sadness you smiled over, the anger you called unspiritual, the grief you denied in the name of peace. This is where another layer reveals itself, not through judgment this time, but through the mask of transcendence, the urge to avoid discomfort through the language of awakening, the impulse to dress wounds in spiritual words instead of healing them through presence. Spiritual bypassing often looks like progress. It looks like calm, like surrender, like wisdom. But in truth, it is avoidance wrapped in robes. It is discomfort hidden beneath ideas. It begins when pain arises and the mind quickly reaches for concepts instead of connection, when sadness is met with a quote instead of care, when anger is silenced by calling it ego, when grief is labeled as attachment and pushed aside. These are not teachings. They are defenses, soft-spoken, well-intentioned, but still rooted in fear. The Buddha never taught the dismissal of pain. He taught the understanding of it, the full knowing of suffering as the first noble truth, not to condemn it, not to romanticize it, but to face it with honesty and tenderness. Spiritual bypassing breaks this path by pretending to transcend pain without ever meeting it. It uses high ideals as armor. It replaces self-judgment with a polished self-image. Not better, just more subtle. The danger of this bypassing is that it hides behind virtue. It tells you that you should be grateful even when your heart is aching. It tells you to stay detached even when your body is calling for connection. It tells you to let go before you've even held what needed to be felt. This creates a split, a disconnection from truth. You begin to question your emotions. You suppress parts of your experience in order to appear wise. You feel shame for not being at peace all the time, and slowly, without realizing, you replace one kind of judgment with another. This time, the voice doesn't say, "You're not good enough." It says, "You're not awakened enough. You're not peaceful enough. You're still attached." The language changes, but the pressure remains. The striving remains. The sense of failure remains. You believe you're behind on a path that was never meant to be a competition. This is suffering wearing a spiritual mask. In Buddhist practice, mindfulness means seeing clearly, and that includes seeing when the practice itself is being used to escape instead of to wake up. True practice is not about looking good. It is about being real. It meets everything with presence, especially the parts we wish to avoid. When shame is disguised as discipline, it leads to repression. When grief is covered with neutrality, it becomes frozen. When confusion is masked by certainty, it breeds rigidity. These states are not signs of spiritual weakness. They are signs of being human. The path is not about being untouched by life. It is about being fully present with it. Authentic practice does not reject emotion. It makes space for it, not to indulge it or believe every story, but to feel without fear, without narrative, without control. Emotions are not mistakes. They are messengers, temporary, flowing, pointing to needs, wounds, boundaries. When we rush to label them as obstacles, we lose the opportunity to learn from them. The idea of always being high vibration, of constantly staying positive, of never feeling reactive, these are not freedom. They are rules created by the same part of the mind that wants control. True liberation comes from letting go of that control, from allowing anger to arise, to burn cleanly, and to pass without guilt, from letting tears fall without apologizing, from knowing that suffering is not a failure of practice, it is the doorway into it. There is a difference between wisdom and bypass. Wisdom holds pain with compassion. Bypass avoids it with language. Wisdom brings clarity through feeling. Bypass brings numbness through pretense. One opens the heart, the other shuts it quietly. Many people begin to suffer more not because they're off the path, but because they are trying so hard to appear on it. They hold themselves to a spiritual standard that excludes their actual experience. This creates distance between you and others, between you and your own body, between you and the simplicity of being. In the Dharma, the middle way is key. It avoids extremes, not clinging to emotion, not rejecting it, not falling into indulgence, not falling into suppression, just being with what is, with tenderness, with patience, letting everything arise and pass in its own time without labels. When spiritual concepts are used as shortcuts, they often lead to more suffering. Instead of saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," you say, "It's just my ego." Instead of saying, "I'm lonely," you say, "I should be content within." These ideas may contain truth, but when used too quickly, they prevent healing. They become tools of dismissal rather than understanding. Practice means slowing down. It means recognizing when you're bypassing and gently coming back. You don't need to be perfectly aware all the time. You don't need to be enlightened to be worthy. You are allowed to be messy, to not know, to contradict yourself, to grow slowly. This is not weakness. This is the soil of real transformation. The more you allow yourself to be real, the more peace becomes possible. Because peace does not come from avoiding difficulty. It comes from not being at war with it. The moment you stop pretending to be somewhere you're not, a great stillness opens. There is nothing to prove, no one to impress. Just this breath, just this body, just this heart, doing its best. Kindness becomes your guide, not just toward others, but toward yourself, toward the parts of you that struggle, the parts that fall into old habits, the parts that still crave approval. You meet them not with judgment, not with superiority, but with humility. Spiritual humility is knowing that awakening is not a destination. It is a continual returning, a falling and rising, an unfolding of layers you didn't know were there. And every time you drop the image and return to presence, the heart softens. You become more available, more sincere, more human. This sincerity is what others feel. It's what brings true connection, not the performance of being enlightened, but the courage to be open, to say, "I'm still learning. I still feel pain. I still forget." This honesty makes space for others to do the same. It ends the cycle of comparison. It ends the race to be the most evolved. The most compassionate beings are not those who deny their humanity. They are the ones who include it, fully, tenderly, without shame. That inclusion is what ends the suffering of the divided self. The one that wants to be perfect while hiding its wounds. Healing happens when there is no more hiding. So begin here. Begin by noticing where you use spiritual language to avoid the truth, where you talk about surrender but haven't yet allowed yourself to grieve, where you repeat that you're fine but your chest is heavy, where you say, "It's all meant to be," while your body tightens. Notice, breathe, allow. Let the ideas go for a moment. Return to the experience. What is happening right now in the body? What is being pushed aside? What needs your attention, not your fixing? This is presence. And from this presence, the most profound healing unfolds. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped escaping. You began to trust that truth is enough, and that in itself is the path. And when the need to appear healed falls away, what's left is something far more honest, an inner life that breathes on its own without needing to impress anyone. No masks, no pretending, just the truth of being human, moment by moment. But even here, where authenticity starts to grow, another pressure quietly enters. Not from outside, but from within. A subtle push. a quiet sense that you still need to do more, become better, achieve peace, fast, evolve quickly, fix everything. It's gentle on the surface, but relentless underneath. This is not the voice of a parent or teacher. It doesn't sound like the past. It sounds like progress, like purpose, like growth. But it carries the same sharp edge, the same undertone of not yet good enough. This is the hidden judgment that lives inside self-improvement. The culture of self-help is full of language that promises wholeness. If you just follow the right method, read the right book, listen to the right voice. It tells you that peace is on the other side of productivity. Healing is just one more habit away, and happiness belongs to those who wake up early and never stop optimizing. But beneath that polished surface is a dangerous idea that who you are right now isn't enough. Even the desire to be better can become a form of resistance to what is. Wanting to grow is not the problem. It's the belief that you must constantly improve to be worthy that creates suffering. In Buddhist practice, we are reminded again and again that striving is not the same as liberation. The path is not about becoming something. It is about seeing clearly what already is and letting go of what is false. When self-improvement becomes a task, the mind treats your life like a project. You are no longer someone to be cared for. You become someone to be worked on. This creates separation, a split between who you are and who you think you should be. And that gap is filled with pressure, shame, and quiet despair. This kind of striving shows up everywhere. In meditation, it looks like trying to reach a perfect state instead of simply sitting with what is. In therapy, it becomes an endless loop of fixing, where no amount of insight ever feels like enough. In daily life, it becomes performance, habit stacking, routine building, chasing milestones, always looking ahead, never landing here. The irony is that this hunger for change often comes from a genuine place, a wish to feel peace, a longing to stop suffering. But when the tools meant to support you become new standards to meet, they stop being healing. They become a form of control. Control, at its root, comes from fear. Fear that if you stop pushing, everything will fall apart. Fear that if you accept yourself, you'll stop growing. Fear that if you don't keep improving, you'll be left behind. These fears are not weakness. They are wounds, and they need compassion, not more pressure. Buddhism teaches that clinging to outcomes is the root of suffering. When you attach your worth to growth, you turn freedom into another race. Every insight becomes a benchmark. Every mistake becomes a setback. Even stillness becomes a goal. But liberation does not arrive through perfection. It arrives through letting go. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means trusting that your nature is already awake, that the core of your being does not need to be built. It needs to be uncovered. Every practice, every breath, every moment of awareness is not a step forward, but a return, not toward a better version of you, but toward what is already true. When the self-improvement mindset takes over, subtle violence begins. You speak harshly to yourself in the name of accountability. You overschedule in the name of discipline. You ignore your body's signals in the name of productivity. You call it focus when it's really fear of being still. Stillness reveals what striving hides, and when you stop for long enough, you might notice the exhaustion underneath. the quiet ache of never feeling caught up, the constant evaluation of how you're doing, the inner measuring stick that keeps shifting no matter how much progress you make. These are signs that something is off, that the goal is no longer peace, but performance. Comparison thrives in this space. You begin to watch others not with curiosity, but with anxiety. Their routines, their progress, their highlights become mirrors, not to learn, but to judge. You wonder if you're behind, if you're doing enough, if you're falling short. This comparison turns even community into competition. The Dharma reminds us that peace is not found in being ahead. Peace is found in being present, and presence cannot be measured. It cannot be evaluated. It is either here or it is not. To return to presence, you must begin by noticing the pressure. The subtle self-talk that says, "I should be more grounded by now," or "Why am I still triggered?" or "I thought I had healed this already." These thoughts seem useful, but they are judgments in disguise. They are not invitations to awareness. They are punishments dressed as discipline. Real discipline in spiritual practice is not harsh. It is rooted in care. It says, "Come back gently. Try again kindly. Stay even when it's hard." This kind of discipline creates space. It brings softness, not strain. If your growth feels like tightening, something is being held too tightly. You are not here to win at healing. You are not a project. You are a being, breathing, changing, learning, failing, returning, always returning. Not because you're behind, but because returning is the path. When you meet yourself here without needing to add or fix, something subtle opens. A trust. A quiet knowing that nothing essential is missing. That your value is not measured by your output. That your practice is not a product. That your worth is not something to be earned. From this place, the tools of self-help can be used with wisdom. They become support, not obligation. Reflection becomes insight, not self-attack. Mindfulness becomes connection, not performance. Growth becomes natural, not forced. This shift begins with small questions. Does this tool support my heart? Or does it make me feel like I need to be someone else? Does this practice open me, or does it make me feel like a failure when I miss it? Do I feel more human or more hollow the more I chase improvement? These questions are not meant to create doubt. They are meant to invite clarity. The path of awakening is not made of rigid steps. It is made of honest moments, over and over. When you begin to release the grip of perfection, you can feel again. You can rest. You can listen to your body and trust what it says. You can respond to your needs without guilt. You can stop when you're tired. You can soften when you're hurting. You begin to live, not as someone climbing, but as someone landing. Landing in the truth that every part of your journey counts. Not just the progress, not just the breakthroughs, but the confusion, the stagnation, the grief. These are not failures. They are part of the unfolding. Just like the lotus grows through mud, your clarity arises through what you once tried to escape. The teachings do not ask you to become something else. They invite you to see clearly what is already here, with warmth, with presence, with patience. That seeing is what transforms, not effort, not pressure, not achievement. You were never meant to become perfect. You were meant to remember your true nature. And as you begin to let go of the pressure to improve constantly, the nervous system starts to trust. It no longer braces, it no longer rushes, it no longer lives in evaluation. It learns to rest in experience, one moment at a time. This rest is not passive, it is not disconnection. It is a powerful returning to reality as it is. No fixing, no branding, just breath, just body, just awareness. And in that awareness, all striving falls away. All that remains is the sacred simplicity of being. Here, now, enough. And when the striving finally softens, when you stop chasing the illusion of constant growth just to feel worthy, what begins to surface is the question most people are afraid to ask. Not, how can I improve? But, why do I keep believing I need to be fixed? Beneath the routines, the goals, the affirmations, and the endless work on yourself, there is often a quiet ache. A belief that something deep within is broken. That your natural state is somehow unacceptable. That healing is a requirement for love. This belief is not obvious. It hides itself in noble language. It says, I'm just trying to be my best self. It says, I'm working on becoming more peaceful. It says, I just need to fix this one part of me, and then I'll finally be whole. But every time you act from the belief that you are not enough as you are, you strengthen the very root of suffering, self-rejection. In Buddhist teachings, suffering is not only pain, it is resistance to what is. And what most people resist is not the outside world, but their own inner experience. Emotions that feel too raw, thoughts that don't match who they want to be, habits that are slow to change. The mind tries to fix these experiences not out of clarity, but out of fear. Because deep down, there is still the belief that if you don't improve yourself fast enough, you will lose love, connection, value. This fixation on fixing becomes an identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who is always in need of work. There's always one more layer to peel, one more shadow to face, one more pattern to heal. The spiritual path becomes a treadmill, not a refuge, and each time you think you've made it, a new flaw appears. The cycle continues. What this cycle hides is a profound truth. Growth does not come from rejection. It comes from inclusion. Not from judging what is wrong, but from meeting every part of yourself with interest and care. The parts that are confused, the parts that make mistakes, the parts that still feel afraid. These are not obstacles to enlightenment. They are the very ground of practice. Trying to fix yourself reinforces the illusion of a separate, broken self that needs fixing. But the Dharma teaches that the self is not solid. It is made of conditions. It arises, changes, and dissolves, just like everything else. There is no fixed you to improve, only experiences flowing through awareness. This is why acceptance is not passivity. It is radical. It is the willingness to say, this too belongs. Even when you feel ashamed, even when you're not proud of your actions, even when you want to hide. Because rejection only deepens separation. But acceptance opens the door to transformation, not by force, but by presence. Presence heals not because it changes things, but because it allows things to be seen clearly. And when you see clearly, without the filter of judgment, you begin to understand. You see why you react, why you cling, why you fall into the same habits. Not as flaws, but as responses to pain, patterns shaped by your past, actions born from protection. This understanding gives birth to compassion, not pity, not excuses, but the deep recognition that what hurts inside you needs care, not correction. You stop being the harsh teacher and start becoming the kind witness. You hold yourself in awareness, not because you are trying to escape your pain, but because you are finally willing to feel it. This shift is what the Buddha called right view, seeing through delusion into the nature of experience. And in this view, there is no enemy inside you, no part to fix, only energy to meet, only stories to release, only suffering to cradle until it lets go. Most of the time, self-fixing is an attempt to control discomfort. The mind says, if I change this about myself, then I won't feel anxious, or sad, or angry. But emotions are not punishments. They are impermanent waves arising from causes and conditions. The more you try to remove them, the more they return. But when you allow them, fully, gently, they begin to dissolve on their own. Acceptance in this way is not giving up. It is stopping the war. It is putting down the tools you've used to reshape yourself and finally listening. It is saying, I trust that this pain is part of the path, and then walking it, not to escape it, but to understand it. When you stop trying to fix yourself, your nervous system starts to relax. The hypervigilance quiets, the inner critic softens. You no longer live in survival mode. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. This safety is not built by changing who you are. It is built by including every part of you, even the ones you were taught to hide. From this place, healing happens naturally, not through effort, but through awareness, not through strategy, but through surrender. The heart opens, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped closing it. And this opening creates space, space to feel, space to rest, space to be without agenda, without proving, without fixing. In this space, love arises, not as a goal, but as a state. Love that is not dependent on your progress, love that is not a reward, love that is simply there because you are alive. This is the path of true freedom, and it does not begin with discipline. It begins with gentleness, with turning toward the parts of you that hurt and saying, you don't have to change, you only have to be seen. When the urge to fix arises, you meet it with curiosity. What part of me feels unworthy right now? What am I afraid will happen if I don't change this? What pain am I trying to avoid? These questions don't need quick answers. They are invitations to sit, to breathe, to stay. Because staying with discomfort is the way it transforms. Running from it keeps it frozen, but presence melts the ice. Even the desire to be spiritual can become a form of rejection. You want to be kind all the time, calm all the time, wise all the time. But these are not who you are. They are passing states, useful when they arise, but not something to grasp. Because when you try to be spiritual instead of being present, you are still trying to become someone, still chasing, still clinging. Buddhist teachings point again and again to non-attachment, letting go not only of things but of ideas, letting go of the story of who you think you should be, letting go of the ideal version of yourself, letting go of the goal of being whole. You are already whole, even in your confusion, even in your mess. even in your fear. That wholeness is not perfection, it is inclusion. It is the full circle of your experience held in compassion. The deepest healing comes when there is nothing left to fix, only love left to give. So the next time you hear yourself say, "I need to change," pause, listen, breathe. Ask yourself, "Can I love this too?" And if the answer is no, that's okay. Meet that no with kindness. That too is part of the path. Because acceptance is not a destination, it is a practice, over and over, breath by breath, learning to stay, learning to feel, learning to trust. And in that trust, something profound happens. You stop trying to get somewhere, you stop measuring your progress, you stop using your life as a checklist. You just live, fully, gently, presently. And that presence becomes your home, not a place to arrive at, a place to rest in, always available, always enough, always free. And when the weight of fixing begins to lift, when you start to feel the space where self-rejection used to live, something unexpected can rise in its place. A heaviness that doesn't come from striving, but from somewhere deeper. Not the pressure to improve, but the feeling that even rest, even joy, even simply being alive is too much. It shows up as guilt with no clear cause, suspicion of your own needs, doubt in your right to feel okay. This is not laziness or lack of discipline. This is pain stored for years in silence. This is trauma that went unseen. Many who carry deep self-judgment are not failing at healing. They are carrying wounds that formed before there were words. These wounds are not caused by one event. They are shaped slowly over time, through repeated moments when safety was missing, when presence was inconsistent, when love had conditions, when emotions were too big for the room, when boundaries were blurred or ignored. This is developmental trauma, not always visible on the outside, but deeply woven into the nervous system. The effects of these early experiences shape the way a person relates to their own mind. Instead of trusting their inner world, they monitor it. Instead of feeling at home inside themselves, they remain on high alert. The body braces, the breath shortens, the heart anticipates something going wrong, not because it wants to suffer, but because it learned to prepare. This preparation becomes a habit, a constant scanning of the self. What did I say? Was that too much? Did I do something wrong? These thoughts aren't just habits of the mind. They're symptoms of a nervous system still trying to prevent what already happened. Still trying to avoid being shamed, left, punished, misunderstood. The pain of developmental trauma is not just what happened, it is the meaning created around it. The silent beliefs that say, "I caused this, I should have known better, I wasn't enough." These beliefs live in the body and grow stronger each time they are repeated without being questioned. Each time the inner voice says, "You're too sensitive," or "You should be over this by now," the old wound is reinforced. In Buddhism, the teaching of dependent origination shows that nothing arises on its own. Every effect has a cause. Every pattern has a history. The judgment you feel now is not random. It has roots, and those roots are often found in the moments when your needs were not met with care, when your tears were inconvenient, when your joy was too loud, when your quietness was misread, when you were told, through words or silence, that you were wrong for simply being. This is why self-judgment can feel so logical. Because it was taught early, not as cruelty, but as what felt normal. And the body doesn't forget. Long after the moment has passed, the tension remains. You learn to shrink your emotions, to stay small in relationships, to earn love through effort, to expect rejection even when kindness is offered. This is not self-hatred, it is self-protection. But protection built on fear can never lead to peace. To shift out of this pattern, you cannot start by forcing new thoughts. The mind cannot be convinced until the body is heard. Trauma lives in the nervous system. Healing must begin there, through gentleness, through slowing down, through learning to stay with discomfort without pushing it away. One of the most compassionate things you can do is recognize when your self-judgment is not about who you are, but about what you had to endure. You were not born distrusting yourself. You learned that somewhere along the way, and if it was learned, it can be unlearned, but not through punishment, only through presence. Presence that says, this fear makes sense. This shame has a reason. This reaction is not wrong. It's a response to pain that was never safe enough to feel fully. When the body feels truly safe, healing begins on its own. But that safety can't be forced. It comes from repeated moments of being with yourself in a new way. Not demanding, not fixing, just witnessing. Holding space for the anger, the sadness, the confusion. The practice of mindfulness is not about avoiding these emotions. It's about making enough space for them to breathe. Enough space for the younger parts of you to feel welcome again. The parts that were silenced. The parts that were told they were too much. They are still here. They want to be heard. Trauma can make you suspicious of your own tenderness. It can make joy feel dangerous. It can make rest feel unsafe. But you can reteach your body that these experiences are allowed, that you do not have to earn ease, that you do not have to prove your right to exist. This happens slowly, in the way you speak to yourself, in the way you sit with your own pain, in the way you stop abandoning yourself in hard moments. Each act of compassion is a signal to your nervous system that it no longer needs to protect you from yourself. In Buddhist teaching, there is no fixed identity. There is no permanent self to hate or fix. There is only process. Conditions are rising and falling. Pain can be transformed not because you force it, but because you stop clinging to the story that it defines you. The story of being too much, the story of being unworthy, the story of needing to constantly be better. These are not truths. They are survival strategies from another time. They kept you safe, but they no longer serve you. You do not heal by escaping these stories. You heal by bowing to them, by listening, by asking, what are you protecting me from? What part of me felt abandoned? What part of me didn't get to speak? This inquiry is not meant to be answered quickly. It is meant to open something, a new relationship with the self, one where judgment is replaced by understanding, one where shame is softened by truth. Your body holds memories your mind can't name, but those memories do not need to be solved. They need to be felt. They need to be included. You are not broken because you react. You are not behind because you carry pain. You are human, with a history, with reasons. And when you begin to honor those reasons, you stop fighting with your own nervous system. You stop pathologizing your feelings. You start treating yourself like someone worth protecting, not from life, but from the belief that you are wrong for how life has shaped you. This shift is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is in the breath you take before reacting. It is in the pause between the trigger and the story. It is in the softness you offer yourself after a hard moment. These are not small things. They are rewiring. They are the undoing of years of fear. The mind may still whisper doubt. The old thoughts may still arise, but you no longer give them the final word. You meet them with presence. You meet them with care. You say, yes, this pain is real. And also, I am more than this pain. The more you stay, the more you trust. The more you trust, the more your body begins to rest. And in that rest, self-judgment loses its grip. Because there is no longer anything to defend against. You are here, and you are enough. Even with the pain, even with the scars, especially with the truth of what you've carried. This is not a weakness. This is your strength. You survived. And now you get to live differently. Not by avoiding the past, but by relating to it with new eyes, with new breath, with new kindness. Not because it's easy, but because it's true. Because who you are beneath the trauma has always been whole. And now that wholeness gets to be seen, without judgment, without shame, without needing to be fixed, just as you are. And once you begin meeting your pain with gentleness, once the fear of your own reactions softens, a quieter layer starts to emerge. It doesn't come with loud thoughts. It doesn't demand attention. It lives underneath the tension, buried in stillness. A feeling that you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. A discomfort with joy. A heaviness that settles when things go well. This isn't just anxiety. This is guilt that has no clear beginning, and behind it, there is grief. Grief that never had space to be felt. Grief that had to be hidden, silenced, or turned into something else. When grief is not allowed to move through the body, it doesn't disappear. It changes form. It lingers in the background, slowly transforming into self-blame. You start to wonder if you were supposed to handle it differently. If you missed something, if it's your fault that it still hurts. And this confusion creates a cycle. The sadness returns, and instead of recognizing it for what it is, you believe it's a sign of failure. You start apologizing for your emotions. You start feeling guilty for still being affected. This is how unresolved grief turns into a lifelong guilt loop. In Buddhist understanding, pain is not wrong. Sadness is not weakness. They are natural responses to change, to loss, to impermanence. But in many early experiences, sadness is not met with presence. It's met with discomfort, with dismissal, with pressure to move on. When this happens enough times, the mind learns that grief is unacceptable, that to feel deeply is to be a burden, that to mourn is to be too much. So it adapts, it hides the sadness, it forces composure, and over time it forgets that anything was lost at all. But the body remembers. The body always remembers. Unprocessed grief gets stored in the nervous system. It colors perception. It affects energy. It influences how you relate to yourself. You might find yourself over-apologizing, avoiding rest, feeling responsible for other people's feelings. These habits are not random. They often point back to a loss that was never named, a goodbye that was never mourned, a heartbreak that had no witness. And when that sadness can't be expressed outwardly, it turns inward. The emotions don't stop existing. They become thoughts, narratives, quiet inner beliefs that say, I should have been stronger. I'm making this worse. I don't deserve to complain. These beliefs repeat themselves until they become part of your identity, not because they are true, but because they are familiar. The guilt loop is not created by what happened. It is created by what was never allowed to be felt. The sadness that stayed locked in the body begins to whisper, and when there's no safe space to hear it, it's misread as something shameful. The sadness is not shameful, but the guilt attaches to it like a shadow, and once it's there, it's hard to separate one from the other. To untangle this loop, you have to slow down enough to feel what's underneath the guilt. This is not about analyzing or solving. It's about sensing, being with the subtle weight that lives in your chest, your gut, your breath. Asking it, not with force, but with patience, what it wants to say, what has been left unspoken, what goodbye was never grieved, what hope had to be abandoned quietly. These questions don't always have answers, but they make space, and that space is what begins to break the cycle. Because guilt can't survive where grief is allowed to breathe. In Buddhist practice, we are taught to touch suffering with mindfulness, not avoidance, not because it's pleasant, but because it's real. Reality must be met for it to be released. If sadness arises, it's not a sign of failure. It's a sign that something within you is still alive, still trying to be seen. The guilt that follows grief is often rooted in mistaken responsibility, believing you should have done more, that you didn't love enough, that you should have seen it coming. But these thoughts are not truth. They are coping. They are how the mind tries to explain pain when it has no container. The more you identify with these thoughts, the deeper the guilt becomes, and the more disconnected you feel from your own heart. This disconnection creates emotional fatigue. You might feel tired without knowing why. You might feel like you're never quite at peace. That's because the body is still holding stories that were never finished. Stories where you had to stay strong, had to move on, had to show up before you were ready. These stories don't ask to be corrected, they ask to be completed. Completion doesn't mean erasing the pain, it means allowing it to pass through fully, to cry without apologizing, to miss someone without feeling weak, to sit with the ache of something lost and not turn away. This is the healing that ends the guilt loop, not intellectual understanding, but emotional integration. Many people try to bypass this by staying busy, by keeping the mind full. But fullness is not the same as peace. It's just another way to avoid stillness. And stillness is where grief waits. Stillness is where the unresolved parts of us live, hoping for attention. You don't need to remember every loss. You don't need to relive every wound. You just need to listen to your body when it says, something is heavy here. Something wants to be felt. And when that moment comes, be gentle. Let the tears come. Let the breath catch. Let the silence be enough. You may notice that when grief is finally allowed, guilt starts to dissolve, not all at once, but slowly, like fog clearing. Because grief, when honored, has its own intelligence. It knows how to move. It knows how to open space for healing. In this space, self-judgment loses its fuel, because judgment thrives when emotions are repressed. When sadness is welcomed, you no longer need to explain or defend it. You just feel, you just be, and being is enough. The Dharma points to impermanence as a key truth. All things arise and pass. Grief too will pass, when it is not resisted, when it is not labeled as weakness, when it is held with care. Guilt, on the other hand, lingers when emotion is denied. It is the residue of unprocessed sorrow, a mental echo of what the heart never got to release. To end the guilt loop, you don't need to become better. You need to feel more honestly, to sit in silence and say, I'm allowed to miss what I lost. I'm allowed to feel sad without fixing it. I'm allowed to let this take time. There is no schedule for grief, no formula. It moves in its own rhythm. Some days it feels like stillness. Other days it stings. But each time you return to it with tenderness, it teaches you how to be with yourself more fully. And from this fullness, guilt fades. Not because you did something to erase it, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. Now you are home, with your heart, with your past, with your sorrow. And from this place, peace begins to return. Slowly, quietly, with every breath that says, I no longer need to carry this alone. And when the weight of guilt finally begins to loosen, when sadness is no longer mistaken for weakness, but seen as a form of truth, a deeper clarity begins to unfold. You begin to see that much of what you rejected in yourself didn't originate in you. It came from what others could not accept. The grief wasn't just about loss. It was also about the parts of you that had to go missing in order for you to be accepted, praised, or loved. You didn't just lose people or places. You lost access to parts of your own being. And now, in the quiet that follows feeling, those parts begin to stir. They return not with noise, but with tension. With emotion you can't name. With impulses you've learned to silence. These are not flaws. They are fragments of self that have waited patiently for you to come back. In Buddhist practice, wholeness is not about perfection. It's about inclusion. And yet, most people live in an internal split, a war between who they think they should be and who they actually are. This conflict does not always feel violent, but it creates exhaustion. It takes energy to pretend, to hold back emotion, to monitor how you speak, feel, respond, and even love. The effort to seem whole becomes the very thing that prevents wholeness. Shadow work is the path of ending that war. It is the practice of turning toward what has been pushed away, not to indulge it, not to justify it, but to understand that nothing you carry is outside the circle of your humanity. Every reaction, every pattern, every urge you're ashamed of has a story, has a root, has a cause. These parts do not ask to be praised, they ask to be known. Many of the traits you judge in yourself, anger, envy, selfishness, pride, are often just responses to earlier suppression. If you weren't allowed to say no, anger became unsafe. If you were taught to always give, the desire to receive feels selfish. If you learned that sadness caused withdrawal, you became overly cheerful. These responses kept you safe in the past, but they also buried parts of you. What's buried doesn't disappear, it becomes unconscious. It shows up in defensiveness, in projection, in overreaction. You may find yourself judging others for traits you secretly carry. This isn't hypocrisy. It's unconscious identification. Buddhism calls this ignorance, not in a moral sense, but in the sense of not seeing clearly. Shadow work invites you to see clearly, not to judge, but to understand. To begin, you must first notice what you avoid in yourself. What feelings make you uncomfortable? What traits in others trigger you most? What aspects of your identity do you hide from those closest to you? These are doors to the shadow, and when you begin to open them, it is not chaos you find, but truth. You may find that your anger protects your boundaries, that your envy reveals buried desire, that your sadness is connected to compassion, that your pride is trying to guard worthiness. None of these qualities are inherently bad. It is their repression that causes suffering. When you disown a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It acts out in hidden ways. It sabotages relationships. It fuels shame. It drains your energy. To integrate a disowned part, you don't need to change it. You need to turn toward it. You need to bring it into awareness with the same compassion you would offer to someone you love. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means creating enough space to feel it fully, to hear what it's trying to tell you. The more you practice this, the more the inner noise quiets, because the parts of you that were pushed away don't want control. They want inclusion. When they are welcomed, they settle. The nervous system relaxes. The internal polarization begins to dissolve. In Buddhist terms, this is the middle way. Not swinging between indulgence and denial, but finding the space where both energy and stillness can coexist. Where you can hold anger without violence. Where you can allow grief without collapse. Where you can express strength without domination. Shadow work is not a one-time practice. It is an ongoing relationship, because life will continue to bring out parts of you that you weren't prepared to see. Growth doesn't mean eliminating the shadow. It means having the tools to meet it when it rises. You may feel resistance. That's part of it. The ego wants to protect the identity it has worked hard to maintain, but the Dharma teaches that identity is impermanent. The more you cling to an ideal self, the more you suffer. But when you see that the self is fluid, made of conditions, you gain freedom. You stop defending. You start exploring. You learn to speak to yourself with honesty, not sugarcoating, not attacking, just naming what is real. There is fear here. There is resentment. There is a desire I don't understand yet. These statements don't define you. They allow you to stay present. They allow the energy to move through without judgment. And when that energy moves, clarity returns. Not the kind that feels certain, but the kind that feels calm. A steady inner knowing that nothing within you is too much, that you can hold it all. This holding is not something you do alone. Part of shadow work is recognizing where community can reflect what you can't see, where safe relationships can offer mirrors, where honest conversation can dissolve shame. Isolation feeds the shadow. Connection reveals it. As you go deeper, you may notice that many of your hidden parts formed as protection. The anger that feels uncontrollable once kept you from being hurt. The stubbornness that frustrates you helped you survive. The jealousy that shames you arose when love felt scarce. These parts don't need to be erased. They need to be thanked, and then gently redirected. Integration is the path forward. Integration means you no longer push yourself into fragments. You stop trying to be only light. You become whole by holding both light and dark, not as opposites, but as aspects of a single truth. You are vast. Wholeness includes contradiction. It includes paradox. You can be strong and tender. You can feel peace and anger in the same breath. You can want connection and fear it too. These are not signs of brokenness. They are signs that you are meeting life fully. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to be pure in the way the world defines it. It invites you to be awake. And being awake means seeing everything clearly, without running, without pretending, without choosing only what feels comfortable. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you where love still needs to go. It shows you what parts of yourself are waiting to be included. And each time you turn toward it, each time you stay present instead of pushing away, you bring that love home. That home is not perfect. It is real. It is lived. It breathes. It breaks and rebuilds. And in every breath, you become more honest, more rooted, more at peace. Not because the war is over, but because there is no longer a war, only a return, over and over, to what has always been yours. And once the hidden parts are no longer feared, once you stop running from the traits that were once pushed into silence, you begin to feel something unfamiliar. A stillness that does not rely on control. A presence that no longer hides. But even here, where wholeness becomes possible, something subtle pulls at you. A thought, a glance, a reaction. Not about yourself directly, but about someone else. Their life, their timing, their ease, their success. You begin to measure again, not with harshness, but with comparison. And the suffering returns, disguised as evaluation. Comparison doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as curiosity, as observation, as a quiet sense of something missing. It tells you you're doing fine, but someone else is doing better. That you've grown, but not fast enough. That your healing is real but less meaningful than theirs. And before you realize, you're no longer inside your own experience. You're standing beside it, judging it against someone else's. This isn't just a passing thought pattern. For many, it becomes an emotional dependency, a reflex used to regulate inner discomfort. The comparison gives you something to cling to, an idea of where you stand. It creates a false sense of control, even if it brings pain, because pain that feels familiar is often preferred over uncertainty. In the Buddhist view, this is another form of clinging. The mind tries to stabilize itself by attaching to ideas of better and worse, higher and lower. It wants to know where you belong, who you're ahead of, what you're missing. But this grasping at meaning through others is a kind of hunger, one that cannot be satisfied. At its root, comparison arises from disconnection. When we are not fully present with our own direct experience, we start looking outside for reference points. We ask others to silently tell us how we're doing, but they never really can. Their lives are shaped by different causes, different wounds, different timelines. The illusion of sameness is just that, an illusion. And yet, comparison continues. Because it's practiced so often, it becomes automatic. You don't even know you're doing it. You open a message, scroll a screen, hear a story, and suddenly you feel less. or more. Either way, your mind is now somewhere else, not here, not in truth, in fantasy, in judgment. This back and forth creates emotional exhaustion. One moment you feel proud, the next ashamed. You begin to resent people you once admired. You shrink when others shine. You overextend to keep up. You second-guess choices that once felt right. These shifts are not caused by failure, they're caused by misalignment. You are no longer centered in your own life. You are orbiting someone else's. To begin healing this, awareness must come first. Not analysis, not explanation, just a simple noticing. The moment your peace changes based on someone else's experience. That's the cue, not to shame yourself, but to return. The practice becomes recognizing comparison as a signal, a redirection, a moment to come back into presence. You don't break comparison by convincing yourself you're better. That only flips the judgment. You break it by not needing to measure at all, by realizing that your path cannot be compared because it's not repeatable. No one else has lived your life. No one else carries your exact causes and conditions. The fruit of your path is unique, and the Dharma teaches us to honor what is unique, not as special, but as real. Emotional dependency on comparison often comes from early experiences of inconsistency. If validation came from external cues, approval, grades, reactions, then the nervous system learned to scan the environment for feedback. You learned to adapt based on what others were doing, not because you lacked intelligence or willpower, but because it felt safer to mimic than to be fully seen. This habit follows you into adulthood. You judge your value by reflection. If others seem peaceful, you think you're not. If others express confidence, you question your worth. Even if you're doing well, the presence of someone doing better feels like a threat. But that threat is not real. It's a memory of a time when being enough felt conditional. To shift this pattern, the nervous system needs new information, new moments where safety does not depend on being ahead, where connection does not require comparison. This happens slowly, in small, conscious actions. When you celebrate someone's success without shrinking, when you allow your joy even when others are struggling, when you honor your own timing without apology. These choices are not about morality, they're about freedom. Each time you resist the urge to compare, you reclaim energy. You return to your life. And in that return, you build trust, not in perfection, but in presence. Buddhist practice encourages direct experience, not interpretation, not assumption, just this moment, just this breath, just this feeling as it is. Comparison lives in the mind. Presence lives in the body. The more you ground into your senses, what you see, hear, touch, the less you get pulled into mental stories. Your nervous system remembers its center. Your attention returns to what matters. This is not a one-time shift. It is a practice, because the world is full of invitations to leave yourself. Messages that say you're behind, that others are winning, that you need to prove something. But these are illusions. No one wins at being human. There is no competition in healing, no trophy for awakening. The mind creates these games and then suffers when it cannot win. Freedom begins when you stop playing. This doesn't mean you don't learn from others. It means you stop using their path as a mirror for your worth. You listen with openness, not with self-doubt. You take what resonates. You let the rest pass. And when comparison does arise, as it will, you meet it with clarity. You say, "Ah, the mind is searching again." Not wrong, not shameful, just a moment of forgetting. And in that naming, you return. The return is always here. It doesn't require confidence. It doesn't need certainty. It needs willingness. The willingness to see that your life is enough. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. Comparison tells you that love is earned, that worth must be proven. But Dharma teaches that all beings are worthy by nature, no exception, not based on status, not based on progress, based on presence. So the next time you feel that subtle tug, the one that says, "Look at them. What does that mean about you?" Pause, exhale, and ask a different question. What do I need right now to feel connected to myself? That question breaks the cycle, and each time you ask it, each time you follow it, you take another step out of dependency, out of mental grasping, into presence, into your body, into truth. And from that truth, comparison no longer has power. It becomes just another thought, a passing cloud, not a prison, not a guide, just something you see and let go, again and again, until your peace is no longer based on anything outside of you. Only this moment, only this life, only now. And as comparison loses its grip, as your attention begins to return to what is actually happening within you, a deeper insight quietly begins to surface. It becomes clear that the mind not only measures, but filters. That what you believe about yourself is not pure fact, but the result of years of interpretation. And if your inner world has been shaped by judgment, pressure, trauma, or unmet needs, then the lens you see yourself through has never been neutral. What you take as truth about who you are is rarely untouched by distortion. The belief in objectivity, the idea that your self-perception is accurate or fixed, is one of the most subtle traps in the inner journey. Because you don't just experience your life, you experience your story about your life, and that story has been shaped by countless conditions, both seen and unseen. You remember your past not as it happened, but as your nervous system recorded it. You assess your present through beliefs that were formed in moments of stress, abandonment, or misunderstanding. This is not a flaw in your character. It's simply how perception works. In Buddhist practice, this is called delusion, one of the three roots of suffering. Not delusion as madness, but as confusion, as misseeing. It is the belief that what arises in the mind is inherently accurate, that your thoughts about yourself are reflections of reality rather than reactions to it. But perception is shaped by karma, by conditioning, by memory, by language. It bends and filters what is seen. You never look at yourself directly. You look through the mind's history. Understanding this is not meant to cause distrust. It's meant to create space between what you believe and what actually is. If your mind tells you that you're behind, it may be repeating an old rule that someone else handed you. If your inner voice says you're not good enough, it may be echoing a standard that was never yours. What feels like truth is often just familiarity. The danger of assuming objectivity is that you begin to argue with yourself using a distorted mirror. You work endlessly to become something more, never realizing that the image you're trying to fix is already warped. And so, no amount of improvement feels satisfying. No amount of praise feels true, because the internal lens keeps returning to the same angles, the same shadows, the same assumptions. This is where practice becomes essential, not to perfect your life, but to refine your seeing. To question not just the content of thought, but the process of how thought forms. What are the voices you trust without question? Where did they come from? What emotions tend to shape your interpretation of events? How do you respond to uncertainty? These reflections begin to reveal not truth, but habit. And habit, unlike truth, can be changed. This is the path of insight, not gathering more information, but seeing clearly. When you begin to see how biased the mind can be, you stop being so quick to believe it. You learn to hold your self-judgments with a lighter touch. Instead of saying, "I'm always like this," you begin to say, "This thought is arising in this moment, shaped by past conditions." That shift changes everything. It breaks the illusion that your current emotional state defines your identity. It opens the door to curiosity. And with curiosity comes the possibility of transformation. Not because you become something new, but because you stop clinging to what was never fully true. Many people believe that they are being honest with themselves when they are being harsh. But harshness is not clarity.